A plastic cup touched down on a first-class armrest. Dry. Small. So wrong for the place, that the whole cabin went quiet. 11 crystal flutes had already been poured. Nobody counted them. Nobody except the man in the gray hoodie. He said nothing. Didn't frown. Just lifted the plastic cup like it was crystal, and drank. His other hand opened a laptop. 5 years old, letters worn white off the keys, one strip of tape gone yellow along the hinge. The cursor blinked. He typed 3 words. 39,000 feet below, America slid past in the dark. 2 rows back, a phone lay face down on a tray table, then slowly turned over. The flight attendant came down the aisle again. Her smile stretched one size too small for the face underneath it. "Sir, I'll need to see your boarding pass again." He looked up. Reached into the inside pocket of the hoodie. Rain on the tarmac at LAX. Thin. Silver. Falling sideways in the wind coming off the runway like the sky itself couldn't decide what it wanted to do. Desmond Calloway stood at gate 47B, with a backpack over one shoulder. Black canvas. 8 years old. The zipper pull replaced twice, once with a paper clip that lasted longer than it had any right to. He looked like nobody. That was the point. Faded jeans. Gray hoodie, hood down, cuffs gone soft from 100 washes. White sneakers that used to be whiter. A 5-year-old Dell laptop tucked under one arm like a man carrying his own history around, because he didn't trust anyone else to hold it for him. Because that's exactly what it was. He'd written the first working lines of code for his first real company on that machine. 18-hour days. A studio apartment in Palo Alto that smelled like instant noodles and borrowed time. That laptop had seen him broke. It had seen him worth $8 billion. It never once changed how it treated him. Which was more than he could say for almost anybody else in his life. Around him, the other first-class passengers moved through the gate like the air itself owed them something. A man in a navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. A woman in heels clicking against the tile like a countdown nobody had asked to hear. Leather bags. Watches throwing light around the terminal like little dares. Desmond didn't carry any of that today. Today he was just a passenger. Today he was quietly field testing a company he'd bought 72 hours ago for $3.7 billion, and he hadn't told a single person on this aircraft who he was. Continental Skyways. Once the crown jewel of American aviation, back when his father used to point at planes overhead and say somebody built that, son, somebody with grease under their nails just like mine. Now it was bleeding money. Losing routes. Losing whatever it was that used to make passengers believe a first-class ticket meant something more than a bigger seat. His board wanted consultants sent in. Desmond didn't trust consultants. Consultants read spreadsheets. Spreadsheets don't flinch. They don't turn cold at the sight of a hoodie. Desmond wanted the truth, and the truth never once showed up in a boardroom. It showed up in a coach line at 6 in the morning. In a gate agent's face for the half-second, before she remembers she's being watched. In the small, quiet cruelties that live in the gap between a company's stated policy and what actually happens when nobody important seems to be looking. So he flew coach, when he could get away with it. Called his own customer service lines pretending to be somebody, with a complaint. Once spent 4 hours in the lobby of a hotel he owned, sipping bad coffee, just watching. Just listening. Because numbers lie if you let them. People don't. Not when they've convinced themselves nobody who matters is paying attention. He boarded like a ghost. Seat 1A. Leather the color of aged whiskey. Wide enough that a man could disappear into it if he wanted to. A window that framed the gray California sky like a painting nobody had asked for, and nobody would ever hang. Desmond folded himself into it. Laptop bag under the seat. Backpack wedged into the overhead bin between somebody's Toomey suitcase and somebody else's golf clubs, because apparently golf clubs needed to fly first class too. He didn't need the clubs to tell him who these people were. He already knew. He'd been the invisible man before. The one department store clerks trailed at a discreet distance. The one professors looked past, when his hand went up first. The one hotel security guards asked to see room keys twice, sometimes 3 times, even though the reservation was under his own name, paid in full, no balance owed to anybody. 42 years old. Worth more than some small nations put together. And still, some stubborn, unkillable part of him, the part that remembered a kid from Detroit whose father came home every single night smelling like engine grease, and honest work, still braced for it. Still waited for the exact moment somebody decided he didn't belong. He opened the laptop. Not to work yet. He needed 1 second first. Because there'd been a version of this morning where he could have flown private. Skipped the whole exercise. Let some junior VP file a report about service standards, and called the whole thing handled, from 30,000 feet up in an office tower. Except that wasn't how his father raised him. You want to know if a man's any good, his father used to say, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that never once got fully clean, you don't ask him. You watch what he does the day he thinks nobody's grading him. Desmond had built an empire grading people exactly that way. Now it was his own company's turn to be graded. The cabin filled in around him. Eleanor Voss moved through first class like she was conducting an orchestra only she could hear. 50 years old. 28 years with the airline, though she rarely said the number out loud anymore, because it had started to feel less like an achievement, and more like a sentence she'd handed herself. A posture that could cut glass, and had, on at least 2 occasions, actually made a man apologize before she'd said a single word to him. She had a system. Built over decades. Refined the way some people refine a family recipe, quietly, obsessively, with a private pride nobody outside her own head ever fully saw. The system was simple, at least the way she explained it to herself. Read the passenger. Shoes first. Then the watch. Then the specific way they walked down the aisle. Did they apologize for taking up space, or did they simply expect the space to rearrange itself around them the way water rearranges itself around a stone? Almost 3 decades had taught her, or so she believed, that the answer told her everything worth knowing. She reached row 2. Champagne, sir? Walter Briggs looked up like he'd been expecting that exact question his entire adult life. 55 years old. A real estate empire spread across 3 states. Navy suit. Gold watch catching the cabin light every time he moved his wrist, which was often because Walter liked people noticing his wrist. Absolutely, he said. And make sure the steak's cooked right this time. Medium rare. Last flight it came out like a hockey puck somebody left on the grill by accident. Of course, Mr. Briggs. Eleanor's smile widened, and it was almost genuine. I'll speak to the chef myself. This was the job the way it was supposed to work. A passenger who understood exactly where he stood in the world, and a world that had, so far, never once made him doubt it. She moved on. Row 1. An elderly couple, married so long they'd started to resemble each other in small unconscious ways, the same tilt of the head, the same way of reaching for a hand without looking. She gave them the warm, careful deference she reserved for passengers who'd clearly been flying first class, since before Eleanor was old enough to pour a glass of anything. Then she reached seat 1A. And something old in her, something practiced past the point of thought, clicked shut before her eyes had even finished the assessment. Hoodie. Jeans. Sneakers with real miles on them. No watch worth mentioning. No luggage tag from a 5-star loyalty program. No cufflinks. No cologne expensive enough to notice. Just a man. Quiet. Still. Looking out the window like the sky owed him an explanation for something. Eleanor's internal ledger opened itself without asking permission. Upgrade passenger. Miles redemption. Contest winner, maybe? Somebody's assistant who got bumped by accident, and hadn't figured out, yet that he should be grateful, and quiet about it. She'd met the type 100 times. They didn't know the unwritten rules. ordered 3 drinks, and complained when the 4th one took longer than they wanted. Disrupted the rhythm she'd spent 28 years perfecting, into something close to muscle memory. Sir. Her voice cooled by exactly the number of degrees she trained herself to cool it. Champagne? Desmond looked up. Sure. Thank you. Plain. No performance in it. Just a man accepting a drink that had already been offered to 11 other people in this cabin, without a second's hesitation. Eleanor didn't move. We're actually running a bit low, she said. I'll need to check on that. She did not check on it. She walked away. Camila Ortiz stood in the galley. 26 years old. 2 years into the job. Still young enough, still hopeful enough, to believe the training manual actually meant the things it printed in bold letters on page 1. She watched Eleanor come back, from the aisle carrying an empty tray, and a face like a closed door, with the deadbolt thrown. Diana said we're low on champagne. Camila started, then caught herself. Eleanor. Not Diana. Half the senior crew still slipped, and called her by the old nickname she'd had, since her first year flying, but Camila had learned fast never to use it to her face. Eleanor said we're low? We're not low. Eleanor set the tray down harder than the moment required. Glass rattled against glass, sharp and small. I need you to handle the beverage service in economy. Camila blinked. Now? Now. It wasn't a request. In 2 years it had never once been a request. Camila walked toward economy, with her shoulders already curling inward, the exact posture of a person who has decided, again, quietly, that today is not the day she's going to say something. She was 26. She had a mother, with a bad hip, and a 15-year-old brother, who ate like he was training for a famine that hadn't arrived yet. She had rent due on the 4th of every single month, whether or not she felt like standing up for a stranger sitting in seat 1A. Not today, she told herself. You cannot afford today. But some part of her, small, stubborn, the exact part her own mother always warned would get her fired one day, kept glancing back, over her shoulder at the man, with the old laptop, and the empty hands. 2 rows back, Priya Nandani had her phone face down on the tray table. 29 years old. A freelance journalist, with 800,000 followers, who trusted her, above almost anyone else they followed, to find the ugly thing hiding directly underneath the polished thing. She hadn't boarded this flight looking for a story. She'd boarded because her editor wanted something dry, and safe on airline loyalty programs. Data. Numbers. A think piece nobody would remember existed by Thursday. But Priya had good instincts, the kind you don't get taught, and right now those instincts were telling her that something in row 1 had just quietly curdled. She didn't reach for the phone. Not yet. She just watched. Vivian Chow sat in 1F, reading, glasses low on her nose, a legal brief spread across her tray table like a crime scene only she had the training to read. 61 pages. A case bound for the Supreme Court next month. She'd already read it 4 times, and would read it 4 more, before she'd let herself trust it. She noticed the exchange in row 1 the way she noticed everything, off to the side, precisely, filed away before her conscious mind had finished catching up. Interesting, she thought. Served everyone else without a beat of hesitation. She said nothing. Not yet. 3 decades of litigation had taught her that the smartest move in the early minutes of an injustice was to watch. Gather. Let the pattern declare itself in its own time, before spending any credibility calling it out too soon. So she watched. And underneath the practiced stillness of her face, something old and sharp began, quietly, to sharpen further. Row 3. Dr. Elliot Ward, 62, cardiac surgeon, already deep in his laptop reviewing slides for a conference in 3 days. He barely glanced up when Eleanor offered him champagne, a reflexive thank you, the specific kind of gratitude that costs a man nothing, because he's never once had to wonder if it would be withheld from him. He didn't see what happened in row 1. He would. Soon enough. Not yet. The plane climbed. 39,000 feet, eventually, though right now it was still fighting for altitude, engines groaning under the weight of jet fuel, and ambition, the ground falling away beneath in slow gray folds like something being erased. Desmond opened his laptop. A blank document. A cursor blinking like a small mechanical heartbeat. Continental Skyways, Initial Field Observations. He typed slowly. Deliberately. The way his father used to work on an engine, no wasted motion, no rushing a diagnosis, before you actually understood what was broken. Cabin condition, dated. Needs refresh. Priority, medium. Crew responsiveness, inconsistent. He paused. Because how do you write down what just happened? How do you put a bureaucratic label on a feeling he'd carried his entire life? The particular way the air changes, when someone decides who you are, before you've said a single word. He typed anyway. Service disparity observed. Investigating further. Investigating further. That was one way to say it. The other way was, she looked at me, and decided who I was, before I opened my mouth. And he'd been decided upon like that, so many times across 42 years he could have written an entire book about it. Except nobody wanted that book. They wanted numbers. Spreadsheets. The clean version. So he kept typing the clean version, and underneath it, in a place no laptop would ever reach, he kept a different ledger entirely. Eleanor's second pass came 15 minutes later. She moved through the cabin refilling glasses, her rhythm restored, her confidence rebuilt row by row, through the warm, easy gratitude of passengers, who never once had to wonder whether they'd be served. Walter Briggs held his glass up for a refill, without being asked, the universal gesture of a man who has never doubted for 1 second that someone would notice him doing it. Best flight I've had all year, he said. You people know how to run a cabin. Thank you, Mr. Briggs. She reached row 1. Desmond looked up. I'll try that champagne now, if you don't mind. A beat. Of course, sir. The smile stretched thin across her face like fabric pulled one size too small for the body underneath it. Let me check on that inventory. She disappeared into the galley. Came back 4 minutes later. Not with a flute. Not with the same crystal glass she'd used for 11 other passengers. A plastic cup. The kind handed out in coach for $2, and a rehearsed smile. She set it on his armrest the way a person sets down a period at the end of a sentence she'd already decided how she was going to write. Here you go, sir. I hope you enjoy it. Desmond looked at the cup. Looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. The specific weariness of a man watching a very familiar scene play out wearing a slightly newer costume. Thank you, he said quietly. That was all. He picked up the plastic cup like it was made of crystal, because that's the whole thing about dignity. You don't let someone else's smallness set the size of your own response. But he wrote it down. Service disparity, escalating. Documented. 2 rows back, Priya's phone had come off the tray table. She hadn't planned to record anything. She'd planned to write 800 safe words about loyalty programs. But there was something about the plastic cup, something about the specific cruelty of using disposable service on a man who'd paid the exact same $4,000 as everyone else in this cabin, that pushed her thumb toward the record button, before her brain had finished deciding to press it. She didn't point the camera directly at him. Not yet. She wasn't ready to make him the center of a spectacle he hadn't agreed to star in. She just started documenting. Angles. Context. The empty champagne flutes at every other row. The plastic cup, catching the cabin light in a way that somehow made it look even cheaper than it actually was. Just in case, she told herself. Just in case this turns into something. In the galley, Camila came back, from economy pushing a beverage cart, her face still flushed from the walk. She found Eleanor scrubbing at nothing on the counter, jaw tight, movements sharp enough to cut something. Everything okay? Camila asked, because she didn't know what else to say. Fine. Eleanor didn't look up. Some passengers need to be handled a certain way. That's all. Handled how? Eleanor finally turned. And for one unguarded second, something almost like doubt flickered across her face. 28 years of certainty, cracking, just barely, at the edges. You'll understand when you've been doing this, as long as I have. I don't think I want to understand that. The words came out, before Camila could stop them. She felt her own pulse jump. 26 years old, and she just told her supervisor, flat out, that she disagreed. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Nothing. Camila looked at the floor. I said nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Something had shifted. Small. Quiet. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself when it happens, but changes the shape of everything that comes after it. Desmond spent the next hour, with his laptop open and his eyes on the cabin. He watched Eleanor's second champagne round. Watched her linger at Walter's seat for 3 full minutes, talking vintage years like she was auditioning for a sommelier position that didn't exist. Watched her skip his row entirely on the third pass, not even offering the plastic cup this time, just moving past him like he'd already used up his entire allotment of her attention for the day. He watched Camila watching him. Watched her face do something complicated every time she glanced his way, guilt, maybe, or the early groundwork of a decision she hadn't fully made yet. He watched Vivian Chow lower her legal brief a fraction of an inch, just enough to track the cabin, over the top of her reading glasses. He watched Dr. Ward finally look up, from his slides, pulled by something in the air he couldn't yet name. The whole cabin, Desmond realized, was slowly becoming a kind of theater. Everyone had a role. Nobody knew the script yet. Except him. Because he was the only one who already knew how this particular performance would eventually end. His phone buzzed. A text from his COO, back on solid ground somewhere. Board wants a preliminary report by end of week. How's the flight? Desmond looked at the plastic cup still sitting on his armrest, untouched, the cheap fizz already gone flat inside it. He typed back 4 words. Educational. More soon. Closed the message. Went back to watching. Meal service began somewhere over Nevada. Eleanor emerged from the galley, with a tray of menus, her posture straightening the way it always did, before what she privately considered the real performance of the flight. Meal service was where luxury airlines earned their reputation. Where $4,000 tickets justified themselves in truffle butter and dry-aged beef. She started at row 4. Tonight we're featuring a hand-cut filet mignon, dry-aged 28 days, finished with truffle butter, she said, her voice sliding into the warm, practiced cadence of a woman who genuinely loved this part of the job, the part where she got to make people feel like royalty for 6 hours at a stretch. Chef recommends pairing it with the Cabernet Sauvignon. Notes of black cherry, a little espresso on the finish. She worked her way back through the cabin. Dr. Ward, impressed despite the interruption to his slides, ordered the filet. Vivian Chow, after careful and unhurried consideration, chose the salmon. The elderly couple both took the steak, thoroughly charmed by Eleanor's description of the aging process. Walter Briggs ordered the filet, and requested an extra side of truffle butter, which Eleanor promised to arrange personally, because of course she did. By the time she reached row 1, 8 passengers had ordered the filet. 2 had chosen salmon. 1 had gone vegetarian. Eleanor's mental math ran quick and cold. 12 steaks in the warming compartment. 8 ordered. 4 remaining. She approached Desmond, with the same tight, professional smile she'd been wearing for the better part of 2 hours now. Sir, unfortunately we're experiencing higher than expected demand for the filet this evening. A pause, calibrated for maximum plausibility. I can offer you the chicken breast instead. Herb roasted. I think you'll find it quite satisfying. Desmond set his laptop down. Looked at her. Something in the cabin seemed to still, the way air stills right, before weather turns. How many people ordered the steak, before me, he asked. Quiet. Even. I don't discuss other passengers' orders, sir. Eleanor's smile tightened another degree. but I can assure you the chicken is very popular. I'll have the steak, please. As I mentioned, sir, we're out of that option tonight. Across the aisle, Dr. Ward cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said. I couldn't help overhearing. You're out of steak? You just offered Mr. Briggs an extra portion of truffle butter for his. Eleanor turned, color rising fast in her face. We've had some unexpected. How exactly did you run out between his order and this gentleman's? Vivian Chow had lowered her legal brief entirely now, eyes sharp over the top of her glasses, the eyes of a woman who'd spent 30 years catching people in exactly this kind of inconsistency, and enjoying it more than she'd ever admit. You served the cabin in order, back to front. Nobody's changed their order. Sometimes passengers. Nobody changed their order, Walter Briggs said, and there was something new in his voice now. Something that hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. Doubt, quietly moving in, where entitlement used to sit so comfortably. I've been flying this airline 15 years. I've never once heard of running out of a dish mid-service. The cabin had gone quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet, when several people realize, almost at the same instant, they're watching something they'll need to talk about later. Eleanor felt it. Felt the eyes. Felt the shift. And instead of stopping, instead of the small mercy of simply saying you're right, let me fix this, she did what people do, when they've spent 28 years building an entire identity around always being right. She doubled down. Sir, she said, turning back to Desmond, her voice hardening into something brittle. I understand your disappointment, but the chicken is an excellent option. I'm sure you'll find it adequate. Adequate. The word hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Desmond didn't raise his voice. He never did. That had never once been his way, not as a kid getting quietly followed through department stores, not as a college student getting asked which team he played for, not now, 42 years old, with a net worth that could buy this entire airline twice over and still have change left for the terminal. Are you suggesting, he said, slow, deliberate, that I would find the chicken more adequate than the steak every other passenger in this cabin already received? Eleanor's jaw tightened. I'm suggesting that sometimes passengers need to be flexible about their expectations. Based on what criteria? Vivian Chow asked, her voice suddenly very much a courtroom voice. Do you determine which passengers need to be flexible? Silence. Because there was no answer to that question that wouldn't be a confession. And Eleanor, cornered now, frightened in a way she didn't yet have the words for, said the thing that would end up defining the entire rest of this flight. Some passengers, she said, are better suited to different dining options. Part of my job is matching service to passenger comfort levels. Nobody spoke. Priya's phone, still recording from 2 rows back, caught every second of it, clean and undeniable. In the galley, Camila had heard enough. She wasn't supposed to leave her station during meal service. 2 years of training had made that clear. But something in her chest had gone tight and hot, and before she'd fully decided to move, she was already walking toward the warming compartment. She opened it. 4 filet mignon dinners sat inside, truffle butter glistening under the compartment light, untouched, perfectly plated, exactly where they'd been the entire time. She picked up the tray. Her hands were shaking. She noticed it distantly, the way you notice your own heartbeat during a fever, present, undeniable, slightly outside your control. This is it, she thought. This is the moment you either say something, or spend the rest of your life wondering why you didn't. She carried the tray into first class. Isabella, Eleanor caught herself. Camila. What are you doing? Bringing the meals for first class. Those are for economy upgrades. Camila looked down at the tray. At the truffle butter. At the presentation that no economy meal on any airline in America had ever once received. These have the truffle butter, she said quietly. These are the first-class plates. Eleanor's face had gone the color of old paper. Return them to the galley. Now. Diana. The old name slipped out again, and this time Camila didn't bother correcting herself. There's 4 stakes right here. The cabin, already silent, went silent in a new and heavier way. Every passenger in first class had now seen the tray. Had seen the truffle butter. Had seen, with their own eyes, the 4 steak dinners that had supposedly ceased to exist 30 seconds earlier. Walter Briggs stared at Eleanor, with an expression stripped of whatever warmth it had carried 5 minutes ago. Dr. Ward shook his head slowly, the specific disappointment of a man who'd built 40 years of a career on the principle that every patient, every person, deserved the same standard of care no matter what they looked like lying on the table in front of him. And Desmond Calloway sat perfectly still in seat 1A, watching a woman's career come apart in real time, and felt nothing that resembled triumph. He felt something closer to recognition. Here it is, he thought. Here's the thing spreadsheets never once show you. Sir. Eleanor turned to him, and something in her voice had shifted, from cold to desperate, the specific sound of a person feeling the ground disappear from under her 1 inch at a time. I need to ask you to return to your assigned seat. Desmond raised an eyebrow. I am in my assigned seat. There seems to be some confusion about your ticket status. I'll need to see your boarding pass again. It was absurd on its face. He'd been sitting in 1A for over an hour. His pass had been scanned at the gate. Checked during boarding. Verified twice already by a different flight attendant entirely. Dr. Ward stood up. This is completely unacceptable. His voice, trained over 40 years to command an operating room, carried easily through the cabin, without him even raising it. This man has been sitting in the seat since before takeoff. You've served him, poorly, but you've served him. Now you're questioning whether he even belongs here at all? Vivian Chow set down her legal pad, on which she had, without quite realizing it, already begun taking notes. Ma'am, she said, are you suggesting this passenger isn't entitled to be in first class? Based on what exactly? Eleanor's mouth opened. Closed. Because there was no answer. Not one she could say out loud in front of a doctor, a lawyer, a real estate mogul who'd just watched 15 years of loyalty curdle into shame, and a young flight attendant holding a tray of undeniable evidence. But instead of stopping, instead of reaching for the one word, sorry, that might have saved something worth saving, Eleanor reached for her tablet. Fingers trembling. Face flushed. I need to verify passenger credentials, she announced, loud enough for the whole cabin, loud enough for Priya's phone, loud enough for whatever came next. As part of our safety and security protocols. The phrase hung in the recycled air. Safety and security. Magic words. The kind that could justify almost anything once spoken out loud on an aircraft at 39,000 feet. Desmond watched her type. Watched her search for something, anything, that might turn her failure into his fault. And somewhere behind his calm, steady expression, a part of him, that had spent 42 years being underestimated felt something quietly harden into resolve. Let it play out, he told himself. Document everything. Let them show you exactly what this company is, before you decide what it becomes. Because that was the entire point of this flight. Not to catch one woman in one bad moment. To find the shape of the disease, before deciding exactly how deep to cut. Eleanor's search came back empty. The system gave her nothing beyond a basic booking record, a full fare ticket, a name, a frequent flyer number suggesting extensive travel history. No red flags. No irregularities. Nothing but a man who'd paid the same price as everyone else in this cabin, and had been treated like he hadn't. She looked up at him. And for just a moment, one single, unguarded moment, something like doubt crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the stubborn, cornered look of a woman who'd built her entire identity around being right, and could not, at 50 years old, 28 years into a career she still loved despite everything, admit out loud that she might not be. I'll need to speak with the captain, she said. She turned and walked toward the cockpit, her heels clicking against the aisle floor in a rhythm that sounded, to more than one passenger, uncomfortably like a countdown. Camila stood frozen in the aisle, still holding the tray of steak dinners, watching her supervisor disappear toward the flight deck. She looked at Desmond. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have said something sooner." "You said something now?" His voice was gentle, steady. The voice of a man who had, somewhere along the way, learned that gratitude cost nothing and still meant everything. "That matters." Camilla's eyes stung. She blinked hard, twice, and didn't let herself cry in front of a cabin full of witnesses. "Would you like the steak?" she asked. "I would," Desmond said. "Thank you." She set the plate down in front of him. The truffle butter. The fingerling potatoes. The presentation that Eleanor had insisted, 30 seconds earlier, simply did not exist. For a moment the cabin felt almost normal. Almost like an ordinary flight. Almost like nothing had happened at all. Except everyone in first class knew something had happened. And 2 rows back, a phone was still recording. And in the cockpit, a woman with 28 years of certainty was about to make the situation infinitely worse. Desmond ate slowly. Deliberately. Not because he was hungry. The plastic cup of flat champagne still sat untouched on his armrest, a small monument to the last hour, but because eating slowly gave him room to think. He thought about his father. Thought about the garage on the east side of Detroit, where the old man had spent 3 decades fixing other people's engines, coming home every single night, with grease under his fingernails, and a kind of quiet dignity Desmond hadn't fully understood, until he was much, much older. "You don't have to shout to be heard," his father used to say, wiping his hands on a rag that never quite got fully clean. "You just have to stay right long enough that the noise dies down on its own, and people are left holding nothing but the truth." Desmond had built an entire empire on that one idea. Underestimated in boardrooms. In banks. In 100 small rooms full of men in better suits, who assumed the quiet kid from Detroit didn't belong at their table. Every single time, he learned the same lesson. The best response was never fury. It was patience. Documentation. Proof. He thought about Seat 1A. About a young woman named Camilla, who had risked her only paycheck for a total stranger. About a lawyer named Vivian who'd lowered her legal brief at exactly the right second. About a doctor who'd stood up, when it would have been so much easier to stay seated and keep working through his slides. He thought about how a cabin full of strangers had just watched, in real time, the exact thing his father had spent 30 years trying to shield him from. And he thought, with the specific clarity that arrives right before a decision hardens into certainty, this is bigger than one bad employee. Because Eleanor Voss hadn't invented this behavior an hour ago. She'd learned it. Practiced it. Refined it across 28 years, the way anyone refines something they do daily, without a single person ever telling them to stop. Which meant somewhere, in some training packet, or some whispered piece of institutional wisdom quietly handed down, from one senior flight attendant to the next, this had been taught. And if it had been taught, it could be found. Desmond closed his laptop. Picked up his fork. Ate the steak that should have been his an hour ago, while somewhere near the front of the plane, a captain was about to walk directly into a situation he had absolutely no idea how to handle. Captain Daniel Marsh stepped into first class, with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent 23 years flying commercial aircraft, and had never once had that confidence seriously tested. 52 years old. Silver at the temples. A voice trained to sound calm over an intercom regardless of what was actually happening either on the ground or up in the air. He was not prepared for this. "Diana," he said, using the old nickname, without even thinking about it, the way you do with someone you've worked alongside for years. "What's the situation?" Eleanor straightened, drawing confidence from his presence the way a person draws warmth from standing near a fire. "Captain, we have a passenger in 1A who's questioning our service protocols and becoming increasingly disruptive. He's demanding accommodations beyond standard first-class parameters." Desmond looked up at the captain, with the same steady expression he'd held through the entire ordeal. "Captain," he said, "I ordered the steak that was offered to every other passenger in this cabin. I was told there wasn't any." He gestured toward the tray still sitting on his table, the evidence Camila had carried down the aisle like a confession she couldn't hold in any longer. As you can see, that wasn't true. Captain Marsh's gaze moved from the plate to Eleanor to the young flight attendant standing rigid in the aisle, and something in his expression shifted slowly, from confident to uncertain. Because this wasn't the story he'd been told. This wasn't a passenger problem. This was something else entirely, and he could feel it settling into his chest like weather changing. "Eleanor," he said, careful now, weighing each word before he let it out. "Do we have steak dinners available?" "Captain, I was managing service allocation based on." "That's a yes or no question." Silence. Camila stepped forward, before she could stop herself, her voice shaking but clear. "We have 4 steak dinners in the warming compartment, Captain. There was never a shortage." The captain's face darkened. Not at Camila. At the shape of a much larger problem he was only just beginning to understand. He looked at Desmond. Looked at the quiet, steady man in the hoodie who'd said almost nothing this entire flight, who hadn't raised his voice once, who had simply sat there and absorbed one small cruelty after another with a patience that Captain Marsh, watching him now, was starting to suspect wasn't passivity at all. It was documentation. It was a man taking careful notes. "Sir," Captain Marsh said, his voice softer now, more careful. "I apologize for the confusion. I'll personally make sure you receive the meal you ordered." "Thank you, Captain." But the damage, whatever final shape it would eventually take, had already been done. 39,000 feet above the American heartland, a phone had been recording for the better part of 10 minutes. A lawyer had a legal pad half filled, with notes she hadn't planned on taking that day. A doctor was already composing, quietly in his head, the exact words he'd use if anyone ever asked him what he witnessed today. A young flight attendant had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and she wasn't sorry. A senior flight attendant, with 28 years of certainty, had just discovered, in front of the worst possible audience, that certainty and correctness had never once been the same thing. And a man in a gray hoodie, sitting quietly in seat 1A, with a 5-year-old laptop, and a plate of filet mignon finally in front of him, understood something none of them did yet. This flight was not going to end the way any of them expected. Because in the inside pocket of that hoodie sat a slim leather portfolio, folded flat, unremarkable, easy to overlook, embossed, with 3 letters that would, before this aircraft ever touched down at JFK, change every single life sitting in this cabin. H.A.G. Halcyon Aviation Group. Desmond hadn't planned to reveal it yet. He wanted to see how far this would go first. He wanted to know exactly what kind of company he'd actually bought. Somewhere over Kansas, as the sun began its long slow drop toward the horizon, and the cabin lights dimmed low for the evening, he opened his laptop one more time, and began to type, not observations now, not notes, but the outline of a decision that had been quietly building in him, since the moment a plastic cup landed on his armrest like a small, cheap verdict. "This ends today," he wrote. Not with anger. With proof. And then, after that, with change. He closed the laptop. Looked out the window at the darkening sky. And waited for whatever was coming next. Kansas, somewhere below. Dark fields. Dark rivers. A grid of tiny lights, that meant absolutely nothing, from 39,000 feet. The cabin had gone quiet in the wrong way. Not peaceful. Loaded. Because a captain had walked away with promises. Because a plate of steak sat cooling on a tray table, evidence now more than dinner. Because everyone in first class had just watched something they couldn't unsee, and nobody quite knew what to do with their own hands. Eleanor Voss stood near the galley curtain. Not serving. Not moving. Just standing. Almost 3 decades, and she'd never once frozen like this before. Not during the bad turbulence over the Rockies. Not during the medical emergency in a year she preferred not to think about, the diabetic passenger who'd gone gray, and sweating in 3C, while Eleanor talked him, through it calm, as still water, a rookie flight attendant crying in the galley the whole time. She didn't freeze. Except she was frozen now. Because something had cracked. Not the whole system. Not yet. Something smaller. Something in her chest that had held perfectly steady for 30 years, and had just, over the span of 40 minutes, begun to shake in a way she couldn't will still. You did nothing wrong, she told herself. You were managing the cabin. That's the job. Except the job had never, before, required her to lie about inventory directly to a captain's face. Except the job had never, before, placed a tray of undeniable evidence in front of 11 witnesses. Except. She stopped the thought. Physically. Shook her head like a woman trying to shake water loose from her ear. Not now. Think later. Survive first. Camila found her there. Still holding the empty serving cart, still trembling slightly, 26 years old, and newly, terrifyingly aware that she'd just done something that could not be walked back. Eleanor. No answer. Eleanor, are you okay? Eleanor turned. And for one unguarded second, Camila saw something underneath the practiced ice. Fear. Real fear. The kind that doesn't announce itself, with tears, just sits behind the eyes like a held breath nobody's letting go. You embarrassed me, Eleanor said quietly. In front of the whole cabin. I told the truth. There's a difference between truth and timing, Camila. You'll learn that. Eventually. I don't want to learn that. The words came out sharper than Camila intended. She watched them land. Watched Eleanor's face do something complicated, not quite anger, not quite hurt, something older than either. 20 years, Eleanor said. Almost to herself now. 20 years, and you think one flight makes you qualified to? She stopped. Because down the aisle, seat 1A had started making a phone call. And something about the way Desmond Calloway held that phone, low, calm, completely unbothered by the chaos he was sitting in the middle of, made the back of Eleanor's neck go cold in a way she couldn't explain to herself. Yeah, Desmond said into the phone. Quiet. Even. I'm aware. A pause. No. I don't want intervention mid-flight. I want to see how far this goes, before anyone steps in. Another pause. Longer this time. Because if I stop it now, we fix one flight attendant. I want to know if we're fixing one flight attendant, or if we're fixing an entire company. He listened. Have legal ready when we land? Not to sue anybody. To understand exactly what we're actually dealing with here. 2 rows back, Priya and Annie had gone very still. Because she'd caught the last part of it. Caught the phrase we're dealing with. Caught the tone underneath the words, not a passenger venting to a friend, but a man quietly giving directions. The particular cadence of somebody used to being listened to the first time. She didn't say anything. She just angled her phone a few degrees further toward row 1, and kept recording. Something's off, she thought. Something about this man doesn't fit the hoodie at all. Dr. Elliot Ward had noticed it too. 62 years old. 30 years in operating rooms, which meant 30 years learning to read the exact difference between panic and control on a person's face during the worst moment of their entire life. Desmond Calloway's face right now was not the face of a man in a crisis. It was the face of a man conducting one. Excuse me, Dr. Ward said, leaning slightly across the aisle. I don't mean to pry. But you sound like you work in this industry. Desmond lowered the phone. A small, careful smile. You could say that. What is it you do exactly? Operational improvements. A pause, weighted with something Dr. Ward couldn't quite name yet. Cultural transformation, mostly. Cultural transformation. The phrase just hung there. Odd. Corporate. Entirely wrong for a man in a 5-year-old hoodie holding a 5-year-old laptop. Dr. Ward filed it away. Because that's exactly what 30 years of medicine teaches you. You don't diagnose off a single symptom. You wait for the pattern to fully show itself. Vivian Chow had already started building her own case file. Not literally. She hadn't needed paper for this kind of thing in years, not after 3 decades of trial work. She built cases the way other people build houses. Foundation first, then walls, then finally the roof. That makes the whole structure undeniable to anyone looking at it. Foundation. Eleanor Voss lied about inventory directly to a paying customer. Wall 1. That lie was specific to exactly 1 passenger out of 12, and that passenger happened to be the only black man sitting in the cabin. Wall 2. When challenged, Eleanor hadn't corrected the lie. She'd escalated it, first to the captain, and Vivian strongly suspected she wasn't finished escalating yet. Roof. A woman who has built a whole identity around being the authority in her cabin does not surrender that authority quietly. She digs. And digging, once you're already wrong, usually only makes the next mistake worse than the last one. Vivian looked up from her legal pad. Watched Eleanor disappear back into the galley. Thought, with the flat cold clarity of a woman who'd spent a career watching people destroy themselves in real time, here it comes. She was right. Eleanor emerged from the galley 11 minutes later, with her tablet in hand, and something new sitting in her expression. Not fear anymore. Resolve. The specific, dangerous resolve of a person who's decided the only way out of a hole is to keep digging faster, deeper, until the hole becomes a tunnel, and the tunnel becomes an exit that doesn't actually exist. She walked straight to the intercom panel near the galley. Picked up the handset. Captain, this is Eleanor. I need to report additional concerns about the passenger in 1A. Camila, standing 3 feet away, felt her stomach drop straight through the floor of the aircraft. Eleanor. Don't. Eleanor didn't look at her. Captain, I believe this passenger may be under the influence of alcohol, or some other substance. His behavior has been erratic throughout the flight. He's been photographing crew members without consent. Other passengers have expressed discomfort. Every single word a lie. Not a shading of the truth. Not stress-born exaggeration. A complete, deliberate fabrication, built from absolutely nothing, aimed squarely at a man who had done nothing all flight, but sit quietly and absorb one indignity after another with more patience than most people manage on their very best day. Camila's hands went cold. Because she'd watched this man for 2 hours straight. Watched him accept a plastic cup without a word of complaint. Watched him ask, politely, twice, for the meal he'd already paid for. Watched him say thank you to a 26-year-old flight attendant who just risked her job to bring him a single plate of food. He hadn't raised his voice once. Not one time. And now Eleanor was telling a captain, over an intercom, in front of witnesses, that he was dangerous. Diana. The old name slipped out again, urgent this time, almost pleading. That's not true. You know that's not true. Eleanor lowered the handset just long enough to look at her. You're young, she said. You don't recognize the signs yet. Erratic calm can be more dangerous than erratic panic. You'll learn that too. Eventually. She raised the handset again. And kept talking. In the cockpit, Captain Marsh listened, with a knot growing steadily in his chest. 52 years old. 23 years flying. He'd handled turbulence that threw coffee cups against the ceiling. An engine fire scare over the Atlantic in a year he tried not to think about anymore. A passenger's heart attack somewhere, over Nebraska, that had genuinely scared him more than anything else in his entire career. He had never once been in a situation quite like this. Because FAA regulations were clear. A crew report of passenger misconduct required investigation. That wasn't optional. Wasn't a judgment call he got to make, from a cockpit chair based purely on a hunch. Except something about Eleanor's voice, the specificity of it, the photographing crew members, without consent, the clinical little details stacked up neat, as a resume, sounded less like an honest observation, and more like a story somebody had assembled, brick by brick, under real pressure. He'd known Eleanor 11 years. Flown alongside her dozens of times. Thorough. Sometimes rigid. Never once, in his experience, dishonest. Until today, apparently. Diana. He caught himself using the old name too, the way everyone on this cruise still did out of pure habit. I need specifics. Real specifics. Not impressions. Captain, I've been doing this 20 years. I know what I'm seeing. That's not an answer. Silence on the line. Captain Marsh closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Long enough to feel the full weight of the decision sitting directly in front of him. Support the crew member he'd trusted for over a decade, or trust his own gut, which was quietly, insistently, telling him that something about this entire situation simply didn't add up. He opened his eyes. I'll come back and assess the situation myself, he said. Don't take any further action until I get there. He hung up. Sat for just a moment, in the specific silence of a man who suspects he's about to walk directly into the middle of something that will follow him for the rest of his career, whether he wants it to or not. Desmond had heard every word. The cabin wasn't large. Sound carried further than people liked to admit. And Eleanor, in her panic, hadn't lowered her voice nearly as much as she probably believed she had. Erratic. Photographing crew members. Discomfort among other passengers. None of it true. All of it dangerous. Because Desmond knew, with the specific clarity of a man who'd grown up watching the evening news beside his father every single night, exactly what happened to black men labeled erratic on an aircraft. Knew the word could summon police straight to a gate. Could turn a delayed meal into handcuffs before anyone had time to sort out what actually happened. Could turn an entire flight, his airline, his father's memory-riding shotgun and every single decision he made, into a headline that started with his name and ended somewhere very dark. His hands didn't shake. That was the strange part. Later, replaying it, he'd wonder why they hadn't. 42 years old, and he had never once let his hands shake in a room full of people busy deciding who he was. He picked the phone back up. This time he didn't lower his voice. I need you to document this call, he said. Yes. Right now. Timestamp it. He set the phone flat on the tray table, screen facing up, recording light blinking small, and red and completely undeniable. Folded his hands in his lap. Waited. Vivian Chow leaned across the aisle. Sir. Her voice, when it truly mattered, could fill an entire courtroom, without ever once rising above conversational volume. 30 years of practice had taught her exactly how much weight a quiet sentence could carry, when it needed to. I'm an attorney. I want you to know that everyone in this cabin has now witnessed a fabricated report of misconduct made against you without cause. That is not a small thing. If this situation escalates, you will not be standing alone. Desmond looked at her. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe? Two people who'd each spent decades being underestimated in rooms full of people, who assumed authority looked one particular way, and no other. Thank you, he said. I appreciate that. I'm not doing it for gratitude, Vivian said. I'm doing it because what I just watched was wrong, and I don't stay quiet about wrong. Not anymore. There was something underneath that last sentence. A history Desmond didn't know yet. A story about not anymore that suggested there had once been a time, earlier, younger, more cautious, when she had stayed quiet and had spent every year since regretting exactly that. He didn't ask. Some doors you let a person open on their own time. Walter Briggs had been quiet for the better part of 20 minutes now. 55 years old. A real estate empire spread across 3 states. A man who'd spent his entire adult life assuming the world simply worked a certain way, that service and status and comfort naturally flowed toward people who looked and dressed and carried themselves the way he did, and that this was the natural order of things rather than a system somebody had deliberately built, with somebody else quietly suffering underneath it the whole time. He was thinking about his son, Xavier, 24 years old. Not the ambitious type Walter had always pictured, more interested in community organizing than commercial real estate, a source of ongoing, low-grade disappointment Walter had never once put into words out loud. 6 months ago, Xavier had called him, from a hotel lobby in Charleston. Furious. Shaking, even through the phone. Told a story about being stopped by hotel security in a lobby he was staying in. Legally staying in. A reservation under his own name, paid in full, a key card in his pocket, that the guard made him produce 3 separate times, before letting him anywhere near the elevator. Walter remembered his own response at the time. Did you say something wrong? Were you dressed appropriately? These things happen for a reason, Xavier, you can't just assume it's. He remembered the silence that followed on the other end of the line. The exhausted silence of a young man who'd called his own father hoping for anger on his behalf, and had gotten a cross-examination instead. Walter hadn't thought about that call in months. He was thinking about it now. Watching a man in a gray hoodie sit perfectly still, while a woman in a crisp uniform accused him, on absolutely no evidence, of being dangerous. Watching, and slowly understanding, with a sick, sliding clarity, that he had done something close to this exact thing to his own son, over the phone, from a place of total comfort, without even being in the room to see it happen. He stood up. Walked to seat 1A. Sir. His voice had lost the earlier command in it, the entitled ease of a man used to being served, without asking twice. It had gone smaller. Rougher around the edges. I need to say something, and I need you to know I mean every word of it. Desmond looked up. I watched this whole thing happen, Walter said. The steak. The champagne. All of it. And I didn't say one word until now, because it was making my flight more comfortable, not less. I got the extra truffle butter. I got the good wine recommendation. I benefited from whatever this is. He swallowed hard. My son called me 6 months ago, after something almost identical happened to him in a hotel lobby. And I asked him what he'd done wrong. Silence. I'm not proud of that, Walter said. I'm telling you, because I think I owe somebody an apology, and he's not sitting on this plane. So I'm giving it to you instead. Desmond studied him for a long moment. Apology accepted, he said quietly. But don't give it to me. Give it to your son. He's the one still waiting on it. Walter's jaw tightened. Something in his throat worked hard twice before he trusted himself to speak again. Yeah, he said. You're right. He walked back to his seat. And for the first time in 15 years of flying first class, Walter Briggs did not feel like the most important person sitting in the cabin. He felt small. And for once in his life, that felt like the beginning of something better than the alternative. Captain Marsh came back, through the curtain 11 minutes later. 52 years old, silver at the temples, a face trained, over 23 years to look calm regardless of what was actually happening underneath it. Right now, underneath, he was not calm. Because something about walking down that aisle, the specific set of the cabin, tension coiled tight, into every single row, Eleanor standing near the galley, with her tablet gripped too hard, was pulling at a memory he hadn't touched in years. He stopped at seat 1A. Looked at the man sitting there. Really looked, the way you look at someone once you start suspecting the story you've been told about them doesn't match what's actually sitting in front of you. Something clicked. Not the face exactly. The stillness. The specific, unhurried way this man held himself, like a person who'd learned young, that panic never once solved anything, and had spent every year, since proving it to himself. You look like somebody I used to know, Captain Marsh said slowly. A long time ago. Desmond tilted his head. That's so. Small aviation shop. East side of Detroit. Man named Otis Calloway ran it. Best mechanic I ever worked under in my life. Marsh's voice had drifted somewhere else entirely now, younger, softer, unguarded in a way it hadn't been all flight. I was 19. Broke. My father had just walked out on us, and I didn't have 2 dimes to rub together for flight school. Otis let me sweep his floors in exchange for lessons on engines. Never once charged me a dime he didn't absolutely have to. The cabin had gone very quiet. Desmond felt something move in his chest, old, sharp, entirely unexpected. Otis Calloway, he said, was my father? Captain Marsh went still. He used to talk about a boy at home, he said, slower now, piecing something together in real time right there in the aisle. Sharp kid. Otis used to say the boy was going to do something, with his life someday, something bigger than the shop, and he'd say it every single week whether anybody asked him to or not. Desmond's throat tightened. He never let me forget it either. Even after he was gone. He's gone? 11 years now. Captain Marsh took his hat off. An old, unconscious gesture, the kind of respect that lives in the body long after the words for it have quietly faded away. I'm sorry, he said. He was a good man. Best I ever knew, in more ways than one. He was. For a moment neither of them said anything else. The whole cabin watched a captain and a passenger discover, 39,000 feet above the American heartland, that they were connected by a small garage on the east side of Detroit, and a mechanic who used to hand out lessons he genuinely couldn't afford to give away for free. Then Captain Marsh's expression hardened. Not at Desmond. At what he now understood he'd almost let happen on his own watch. He turned to Eleanor. You called me back here to tell me this man was dangerous, he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying an edge Camilla had never once heard from him in 2 years of flying together. Based on what, exactly? Because right now, all I'm seeing is a man who's been treated like garbage since the moment we hit cruising altitude, and a crew member who lied about it to my face twice, and is now telling me he's a threat, with absolutely nothing to back it up. Captain, do you have one piece of evidence, he said, for anything you told me on that call? Silence. The kind of silence that answers a question far more completely than any word ever could. Eleanor, Captain Marsh said, quieter now, almost sad about it. I trusted you on every flight I've ever worked with you. Tell me you have something. Eleanor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because there was nothing to give him. There had never been anything to give him. There had only been a lie, built out of fear and pride and years of a system that had never once required her to justify herself this way, not until the one single day it mattered the most. Camilla had gone very still, watching all of it, from the galley entrance. Because something had shifted in her too, not just about Eleanor, but about herself. About 2 years spent believing her supervisor's version of the world without question. About every single time she'd swallowed her own discomfort, because Eleanor told her you'll understand, when you've been doing this, as long as I have. She'd believed that. Had genuinely believed experience could turn cruelty into wisdom if you carried it long enough. She thought about her mother, waiting up most nights, until Camilla's shift finally ended, always asking the exact same question. Did you learn something today, Mija? Today, Camilla thought she had learned something. Just not the kind her mother had ever meant. She stepped forward. Captain, there's something else you should see. Every head in the cabin turned. Eleanor's face went the color of old paper again, the same look, from an hour ago, except worse now, because whatever was coming, she could already feel the shape of it forming in the air. Camilla, she said. Don't. Camilla didn't stop. She reached into her apron pocket, and produced Eleanor's tablet, the same one Eleanor had left behind in the galley during the panicked calls to the cockpit, the screen still open to a document Camilla had noticed weeks ago, and never fully understood until tonight. I found this a while back, Camilla said, her voice shaking, but clearer than it had been all flight. I didn't know what it was at first. I thought maybe it was just notes. She turned the screen toward the captain. Rows of text. Categories. A whole system, laid out in careful, practiced language, the kind of document you build slowly, over years, refining and refining, until it becomes second nature, and stops feeling like a choice at all. Passenger profile indicators. Attire assessment. Luggage tier correlation. Service allocation guidance by passenger type. Captain Marsh read it in silence. His face changed as he read. confusion first. Then something colder settling in behind it. "This is a script," he said slowly. "This is a script for deciding who gets real service and who doesn't." "It's not mine," Eleanor said quickly. Too quickly. "I mean, I didn't write all of it. Most of it. It's—" She stopped. Because the truth, once it started coming out, apparently didn't know how to stop itself halfway through. "It's from my training," she said, quieter now, something breaking loose in her voice for the first time all night. "My first year. My supervisor gave it to me. Said every senior flight attendant kept something like it. Said it was how you learned to read a cabin properly. How you protected the standard." 20 years, Vivian Chow said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else in earshot. "You've been running this system for 20 years. It wasn't a system. It was," Eleanor's voice cracked. "It was just how things were done. Nobody ever told me it was wrong. Nobody ever stopped me." "I'm stopping you," Camila said. "Right now. I'm stopping you." The words hung in the cabin, small and enormous at exactly the same time. Priya Nandani's phone had captured all of it. 12 straight minutes of footage. The tablet. The admission. The specific horror on Eleanor's face, as she realized, in real time, in front of witnesses, that the thing she'd believed for decades was professional wisdom was actually a document capable of ending her career the moment it left this aircraft. Priya hadn't uploaded anything yet. She wasn't ready to. Something told her this story had more underneath it than she'd caught, so far, something about the man in seat 1A, about that phone call, about the phrase cultural transformation, that still didn't fit the hoodie, or the sneakers, or the 5-year-old laptop no matter how she turned it over in her head. She kept the footage. Kept watching. Because her instincts, sharpened by years of finding the story hiding underneath the story, were screaming at her that the biggest twist of this whole flight hadn't happened yet. Desmond sat very still through all of it. Watched Eleanor's confession unravel her piece by piece, in front of a cabin she'd spent 28 years believing she fully controlled. He felt no satisfaction. That surprised him more than anything else that had happened all night. He'd expected, somewhere in some private corner of himself, to feel vindicated once the truth finally surfaced. Instead, he felt something heavier. Sadder. Because Eleanor wasn't lying about the training. He could see it plainly on her face, the specific shock of a person discovering that something she'd believed for decades might have been rotten, from the very beginning. She didn't invent this, he thought. She inherited it. That didn't excuse it. But it did change the shape of what needed to happen next. He thought about his father again. About standing outside an investment club in Boston at 24 years old, invitation folded in his hand, told to use the service entrance around back. About the promise he'd made himself, that night on the sidewalk, watching venture capitalists, through a lit window, while the cold ate straight through his one good suit. "I'll build enough power to own the building someday. Not just enter it." He owned the building now. The only real question left was what kind of owner he intended to be. Captain Marsh straightened. 23 years of training taking over, the part of him trained to make hard decisions fast, regardless of history, regardless of a mechanic named Otis Calloway who'd once given him free lessons on an engine in a garage on the east side of Detroit. "Eleanor," he said, "you're relieved of passenger service duties for the remainder of this flight. Report to the jump seat and remain there." "Captain, That's not a discussion." Eleanor's shoulders sagged. 28 years, collapsing into a single sentence delivered by a man who, 90 minutes earlier, would have defended her, without a second's hesitation. She walked toward the jump seat. Didn't look at Camila. Didn't look at Desmond. Just walked, the specific walk of someone whose entire professional identity had just come apart in front of exactly the people it had never once occurred to her would ever matter. The cabin exhaled. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The particular quiet that follows a storm, before anyone's fully sure it's actually over yet. Dr. Ward looked at Desmond. You handled that with more grace than most people would manage in a lifetime. My father used to say anger is a loan, Desmond said. You always end up paying back more than you ever borrowed. Smart man. He was. Vivian Chow had gone back to her legal pad, writing quickly now, filling page after page, with the specific urgency of a woman who understood, better than anyone else in this cabin, exactly how significant the last hour had really been. This isn't over, she said, half to herself. Not by a long way. She was right. Because 2 rows back, Priya Nandani's phone had just buzzed, with a text from a source inside the aviation industry, a contact she'd cultivated months ago for a completely different story. You still working on that Continental piece? You should know, word is they got acquired 72 hours ago. New ownership. Some tech billionaire out of the aviation and infrastructure space. Nobody's confirmed who yet. Corporates being weirdly quiet about it. Priya read the message twice. Looked up. Looked at seat 1A. At the man, with the old laptop, and the empty champagne cup, and the phone call about cultural transformation, and documenting everything he saw. Her stomach dropped straight through the floor. No, she thought. No, that's insane. That kind of thing doesn't actually happen. Except the phone call. Except the phrase we're dealing with. Except the calm. Except the patience. Except the specific way this man had absorbed every single indignity of the last 2 hours like he was taking careful inventory instead of taking it personally. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't send anything yet. Just sat there, 39,000 feet, over the middle of the country, feeling the shape of the biggest story of her career start quietly assembling itself in the dark. In the jump seat, Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing at all. 20 years. She kept circling back to the number, as if it were supposed to mean something, as if it were supposed to protect her from what had just happened, and every single time she landed on it, it meant a little less than it had the time before. She thought about her own first year on the job. A supervisor named Rosalind, sharp-eyed, precise, the kind of woman who commanded a cabin without ever needing to raise her voice, sitting her down after her 3rd flight and quietly handing her a folded piece of paper. This is how you read a cabin properly, Rosalind had told her. This is how you protect the standard. Nobody teaches you this in training. I'm teaching you now, because I think you're ready for it. Eleanor had felt honored. She remembered that specifically, the warm, proud feeling of being trusted with something secret, something senior, something that made her feel like she'd finally been let inside a circle other flight attendants didn't have access to. She'd added to it over the years. Refined it. Passed pieces of it down to 3 or 4 junior flight attendants across 3 decades, always with that same warm, proud feeling Rosalind had once given her. Never once, in all that time, had she thought of it as anything other than professionalism. Sitting in the jump seat now, replaying the captain's face as he read that document, the cold, sick recognition in his eyes, she understood, for the very first time, exactly what she'd actually been carrying all these years. Not wisdom. A weapon. Handed to her by someone else's hand, and passed along by hers, aimed at people who had never done a single thing wrong except exist in a body that didn't match Eleanor's own private, unexamined idea of who deserved comfort and who didn't. She put her face in her hands. And for the first time, since boarding, Eleanor Voss cried. Quietly. Alone. In a jump seat at the back of a cabin she no longer controlled, above a country she couldn't even see, on a flight that had started out routine, and was ending as the single worst night of her professional life. Up front, Desmond Calloway watched the last light drain fully out of the sky, through his window. He thought about calling his COO back. Thought about drafting the outline of everything that would need to happen once this plane landed, HR notified, legal briefed, an internal investigation launched not just into Eleanor Voss, but into the entire training pipeline that had built her, into how many other flight attendants across how many other hubs were carrying some version of that same document in their own tablets, their own memory, their own decades of unexamined habit. He didn't do any of that yet. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to picture his father's garage, the smell of motor oil, the specific clang of a wrench against concrete, the old radio, that only ever picked up 2 stations, and played both of them badly. You don't have to shout to be heard, his father had told him once, a long time ago, standing over an open hood, with grease to his elbows. You just have to stay right long enough, that the noise finally dies down, and people are left holding nothing but the truth. The noise hadn't died down yet. But it would. Because somewhere behind him, a story was already assembling itself, a journalist, with 800,000 followers, and a text message she hadn't answered yet, a phone full of footage she hadn't uploaded, and a growing, electric certainty that the man in seat 1A was not who this cabin currently believed him to be. Desmond opened his eyes. Looked at his watch. 90 minutes to JFK. 90 minutes until every single person on this aircraft found out exactly who they'd been sharing a cabin with, and exactly what kind of company they were about to watch him rebuild, one uncomfortable, undeniable truth at a time. He picked up his laptop one last time. Typed 4 words at the bottom of his notes, the closing line of a document that had started as a simple field observation and quietly become something closer to a mission statement. Now we build something better. He closed the screen. Settled in to wait for the descent. The seatbelt sign chimed. Small sound. Enormous weight behind it. Because in 22 minutes this aircraft would touch down at JFK, and everyone in first class could feel it now, the specific gravity that builds right before an ending, the way a room goes quiet just before somebody finally says the thing that changes everything. Eleanor Voss sat in the jump seat. Hands still folded. Eyes still red. Almost 30 years compressed into the last 90 minutes, and none of it had settled yet, not really. Just sat there in her chest like swallowed glass, sharp at every edge. She kept thinking about her mother. Which was strange. Her mother had been gone 11 years, and Eleanor almost never let herself think about her midshift. Except tonight the memory kept surfacing anyway, her mother's voice, thin near the end, asking the same question every single time Eleanor came home from a long trip. "Did you take care of people today?" Eleanor had always said yes. She'd meant it too. That was the part still catching in her throat. She had actually believed, every single flight, for nearly 3 decades, that she was taking care of people. That the folder, the system, the careful sorting of who deserved warmth and who deserved a plastic cup, she had genuinely believed, without ever once questioning it, that this was care. Now she didn't know what to call it anymore. Camila found her there again. 3rd time tonight. She was getting good at finding Eleanor in the wreckage of her own decisions. "You don't have to sit with me," Eleanor said, without looking up. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Camila considered the question honestly before she answered. That was new too. A week ago she'd have said something soft and reflexive, something meant purely to smooth the moment over. Tonight she let the silence sit, until the true answer finally arrived on its own. "Because somebody taught you that folder," she said finally. "And somebody's going to have to teach the next person something different. I don't know if that's going to be you. But I think it should be." Eleanor looked up. Something moved behind her eyes. Not hope exactly. Too early for hope. Something closer to the first crack of light under a door that had been shut a long, long time. "You think Halcyon's going to let me anywhere near a training room after tonight?" "I don't know," Camila said. "I don't run this airline." She didn't yet know how close that sentence was to being wrong. 2 rows up, Priya Nandani was staring at her phone like it might bite her. The text still sat there, unanswered. Word is they got acquired 72 hours ago. New ownership. Some tech billionaire out of the aviation and infrastructure space. Nobody's confirmed who yet. She'd run the math a dozen times in the last 20 minutes, and it kept landing on the same impossible number. A man boards a flight in a 5-year-old hoodie. Makes calls about cultural transformation. Says the word documented like it's a legal term rather than a passing comment. Absorbs public humiliation for 2 straight hours, without once raising his voice, like a man storing up receipts instead of losing his patience. No, she told herself. That's not how billionaires fly. That's not how any of this actually works. Except it was exactly how a certain kind of billionaire flew. The kind who didn't trust reports secondhand. The kind who wanted to see the rot, with his own eyes, before deciding exactly how deep to cut into it. She'd interviewed men like that before. Not this one specifically. But the type. The type that never announced themselves, because announcing themselves would defeat the entire purpose of showing up unannounced in the first place. Her thumb moved. She typed a name into the search bar, with hands that weren't quite steady. Desmond Calloway, Halcyon Aviation. The results loaded slower than she wanted them to. Which felt, in the moment, like the single longest 4 seconds of her entire professional life. Then the page filled. A headshot. Same face. Same steady, unbothered eyes, except in the photo he was wearing a suit that looked built around him rather than bought off any rack. Desmond Calloway, 42, founder and CEO of Halcyon Aviation Group. Net worth estimated at $8.1 billion. Halcyon completed its acquisition of Continental Skyways for $3.7 billion earlier this week, the largest aviation deal of the year. Priya set the phone down flat on her tray table. Sat very still. Felt something she rarely felt anymore, after 6 years of chasing stories for a living. She felt afraid of what she was about to do next. Vivian Chow noticed the color drain out of Priya's face, from 2 seats away. You look like you've just seen something, she said quietly. Priya turned the phone toward her, without a word. Vivian read it once. Read it a second time, slower, the specific careful rereading of a woman who'd spent 30 years learning never to trust the first version of any story handed to her. Then she looked down the aisle at seat 1A. At the man, who had, for the last 2.5 hours, absorbed public humiliation, with more discipline than most litigators managed under a hard cross-examination. Well, Vivian said very softly. That changes the calculus considerably. Should I say something to him? No. Vivian's eyes stayed fixed on Desmond's profile, calm against the window, watching the lights of Long Island start to bloom in the dark far below. Let him decide when. A man who's waited this long to reveal it isn't waiting by accident. Desmond felt the shift, before anyone said a single word to him. He'd built an entire career on reading rooms, and this room had just changed temperature. Something in the way Priya had gone still. The way Vivian's gaze kept drifting toward him, and then politely away, the practiced discretion of someone pretending not to have just learned something enormous. Here it comes, he thought. Not with dread. With something closer to readiness. He'd known this exact moment was coming, since he'd boarded, had, in fact, planned for it, the way you plan for a third act, knowing the shape of it even, before all the details arrive. He closed his laptop. Slid it into the bag beneath his seat. Reached into the inside pocket of his hoodie, the one place nobody would ever think to search on a man dressed this way, and drew out a slim leather portfolio, worn soft at the corners, from being carried, unopened, through security checkpoints on 3 separate flights this week alone. He didn't open it yet. Just held it. Let the weight of it settle into his palm. 22 minutes to JFK. He'd give this cabin the truth, before the wheels ever touched ground. That much, at least, he owed all of them. The intercom clicked. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're beginning our initial descent into the New York area. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, and tray tables are in the upright position. Captain Marsh's voice, steady as it always was, carried through the cabin. But underneath the professional calm, something else lived now, the memory of a garage on the east side of Detroit, of a mechanic named Otis who'd handed out lessons he couldn't afford, of a 19-year-old kid sweeping floors in exchange for a future he never could have bought outright any other way. He came back, through the curtain one more time. Stopped at seat 1A. "We'll be on the ground in 20 minutes, he said. "Is there anything you need before we land?" Desmond looked up at him. At the man who, an hour ago, had been ready to believe a lie simply because it came from someone he trusted, and who had, when it mattered most, chosen the truth over comfort anyway. "There's something I need to say to the cabin," Desmond said, "before we land. Would that be all right?" Captain Marsh glanced at the portfolio in Desmond's hands. Didn't ask what was inside it. Something told him he already had a fairly good guess. "Take whatever time you need," he said. "I'll hold the announcement." Desmond stood. It was a small motion. He wasn't a large man, wasn't imposing the way Walter Briggs was imposing, all shoulders and expensive tailoring even now in his rumpled travel clothes. But something about the way he rose, unhurried, deliberate, a man who'd waited his entire life to choose his own moment rather than have it chosen for him, pulled every eye in the cabin toward him at once. Eleanor looked up from the jump seat. Camilla stopped mid-motion in the aisle. Priya's phone came up again, recording now without hesitation, without the careful discretion of the last hour. "Some stories you document quietly. Some you know, the second they're happening, deserve to be seen whole. My name is Desmond Calloway," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The cabin had already gone silent in the specific way that happens right before something irreversible. 3 days ago, my company, Halcyon Aviation Group, completed the acquisition of Continental Skyways. He opened the portfolio, turned it toward the cabin, toward Priya's camera, toward Vivian's sharp, unsurprised eyes, toward Eleanor, whose face had gone the color of old paper for the third time tonight. Corporate documents. A letter of authorization. A signature that matched the one on the boarding pass he'd used 2 hours ago under his own name, because he'd wanted no red carpet, no recognition, no special treatment whatsoever. "I bought this airline because I believe air travel used to mean something," he said. "Not luxury. Dignity. The idea that, when you pay for a seat, you're paying for the promise that you'll be treated like you actually belong in it." He looked down the aisle. At Eleanor. "Tonight I found out that promise doesn't hold for everyone." Nobody moved. "I want to be clear about something," Desmond continued. "This isn't about revenge. I didn't come on this flight looking for someone to punish. I came looking for the truth about a company I'm now responsible for. And I found it. All of it. Not just one flight attendant's bad night. A folder. A system. Years of practice, handed down like a family recipe, that decided who deserved champagne, and who deserved a plastic cup based on nothing more than what a person looked like walking down this aisle." His eyes moved to Camilla. "And I found something else," he said, his voice softening now. "I found a 26-year-old flight attendant, who had every reason in the world to stay quiet tonight, and didn't. Who risked the only job she's got, supporting a mother and a younger brother, because she decided the truth mattered more than her own safety. That's not a small thing. I don't take it lightly." Camilla's eyes filled. She didn't try to hide it this time. Desmond turned toward Eleanor last. The whole cabin seemed to lean in, the specific silent gravity of an audience that knows the hardest part of the story is about to arrive. "Ms. Voss." Eleanor stood. Slowly. Nearly 30 years of posture, still holding even now, even broken. "I'm not going to do this in front of everyone," Desmond said. "What happens next between us happens privately. That's not mercy. That's just how I choose to handle things." He thought briefly of something else his father used to say, that shame paraded in public just teaches a person to hide better, not to actually change. "I'd rather you change." Eleanor's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a moment. "Why," she finally managed, "would you extend me anything at all, after tonight?" "I didn't say I was extending you anything," Desmond said. "I said we'd talk privately. Whatever happens after, that is still entirely up to you. He turned back to the cabin. To everyone else, he said. Thank you. For watching. For refusing to look away. For documenting, for speaking up, for standing when it would have been so much easier to sit down and let the flight simply continue. This company is going to look different by the time most of you fly with us again. I intend to make sure of that personally. He sat back down. The cabin exhaled, not relief exactly, something more complicated, the particular quiet that follows an earthquake, before anyone's fully sure the ground has actually finished moving. The plane began its final descent. 12 minutes. Below, the lights of Queens spread out like something spilled, and never cleaned up, gold and endless, the sprawl of a city that had already seen every kind of story this cabin had just lived through, and would see 100 more, before morning came. Desmond looked out the window. Thought about his father again, always his father tonight, more than any other night in years. You don't have to shout to be heard. He hadn't raised his voice once. Not through the plastic cup. Not through the fabricated inventory. Not through the accusation that had, for a few genuinely terrifying minutes, threatened to turn a bad flight into something involving police at the gate, and headlines that started with his name and ended somewhere very dark indeed. He'd stayed quiet. Documented everything. Let the truth do what truth eventually does, if a person is patient enough and careful enough to let it work all the way through. It outlasts the lie built to hide it. Wheels touched down at 9:47 p.m. The specific thud and shudder of an aircraft returning to the world it had left 5 hours earlier, passengers exhaling as one, the ordinary relief of a safe landing layered right over something far less ordinary that had happened at 39,000 feet. They taxied to the gate in near silence. Nobody reached for a phone the second wheels touched tarmac the way people usually did. Nobody rushed to stand the moment the seatbelt sign clicked off. The cabin held its stillness a moment longer than habit required, like a room, after a funeral, unwilling to be the first one to move. Desmond stood. Gathered his backpack. His 5-year-old laptop. The leather portfolio that had just rewritten every relationship inside this cabin in the space of 2 short sentences. He walked to the jump seat. Ms. Voss, he said quietly. Will you walk with me? They spoke in the empty jet bridge. Just the two of them. The rest of the passengers had been asked, gently, by Captain Marsh, to give them a few minutes before disembarking, an unusual request, but nobody argued the point. Something about the last 2 hours had made ordinary impatience feel very small, and beside the point. Fluorescent light overhead. The low hum of the terminal beyond. The specific emptiness of a space built entirely for people passing through, never for people standing still. Eleanor stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the posture of a woman awaiting sentencing. Go ahead, she said. Say it. Desmond didn't say it right away. He set his bag down first. Looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with the cold satisfaction she'd clearly braced herself for the moment they stepped off the plane. My father ran a machine shop in Detroit, he said instead. 30 years. He used to tell me you learn everything you need to know about a person by watching how they treat someone who can't do anything for them. He paused. Tonight you treated me like I couldn't do anything for you. And you were right. I couldn't. Not because of what I look like. Because I chose not to tell you who I was. I wanted to see the truth. Not the performance. Eleanor's eyes filled. I keep trying to understand how I got here, she said, voice cracking. All these years. I used to be good at this job. I used to believe I was good at this job. You were taught a system, Desmond said. That doesn't excuse what you did. You still have to own it. But it does change what happens next. What happens next? Your employment with Continental ends tonight, he said. Plain. Unflinching. That part isn't negotiable, and I don't think you'd respect me if it were. Eleanor nodded, slow, like she'd already expected nothing less. But I'm not interested in just firing you, and calling that justice, Desmond continued. That fixes nothing. It just removes one person from a system still standing exactly where it was an hour ago. I want to know if you're willing to help me tear that system out by the root. Every training document, every unofficial folder passed hand to hand for 30 years. You know where the bodies are buried, Ms. Voss, because you buried a few of them yourself. I need that knowledge, not your absence. Eleanor stared at him. You want me to help you, she said slowly. After tonight, I want you to spend the next year making sure no other passenger ever goes through what happened on this flight. Consulting. Unpaid, at first, that part's non-negotiable too, given the harm caused. If a year from now I believe you've actually changed, not just apologized, we'll talk about what comes after that. And if I refuse? Then you leave, with nothing but the consequences, Desmond said. That's your choice to make. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Somewhere behind them, in the terminal, an announcement echoed for a delayed flight to Chicago. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life simply continuing on, indifferent to the enormity of what was happening in this narrow bridge of fluorescent light. Why, Eleanor finally asked, would you offer me anything at all? Desmond thought about his father once more. About a phrase the old man used to say, standing over an open engine, wiping his hands on a rag that never quite got fully clean. Because my father used to fix things other people had already given up on, he said. Engines, mostly. But not only engines. He used to say anybody can throw away something broken. It takes a different kind of person to look at it and ask what it would actually take to make it right again. He picked his bag back up off the floor. I don't know if you're worth fixing, Ms. Voss. That's on you to prove now. But I'm not going to be the kind of man who never offers the chance. He turned to leave. Stopped. One more thing, he said. The document. The folder you were taught back in your first year. I want the name of the woman who gave it to you. Eleanor's face went pale in a new way. Rosalind, she said quietly. Rosalind Pierce. She retired years ago. Retired doesn't mean untouchable, Desmond said. If she built that document, or got it from someone else, I intend to find out exactly how far back this goes. This didn't start with you. I don't think it's going to end with you either. But it is going to end. He walked down the jet bridge, without waiting for a response. Behind him, Eleanor Voss stood alone in the fluorescent light, nearly 3 decades dismantled, and something new, smaller, uncertain, but entirely real, beginning, slowly, to take its place. In the terminal, Camilla was waiting. She'd been told to wait by a halcyon representative who'd met the flight at the gate, a woman in a sharp gray suit, who introduced herself simply as corporate, and who had a way of looking at Camilla like she already knew everything that had happened at 39,000 feet, without needing to be told. Desmond found her near the gate agent's podium, backpack still slung over her shoulder, her mother's calls no doubt piling up unanswered in her pocket. Ms. Ortiz. Camilla straightened. Mr. Calloway. I want to offer you something, he said. Not because you deserve pity. Because you deserve recognition. You risked the only income your family has tonight, for a total stranger, because it was right. That's rarer than most people think. I didn't do it for a reward. I know, Desmond said. That's exactly why you're getting one anyway. He extended a business card. Simple. Cream cardstock, black lettering, none of the ostentation she might have expected from a man worth billions of dollars. Director of Service Culture, he said. New position. You'll help me rebuild the training program, from the ground up, replace whatever Eleanor was handed her first year, with something that actually reflects what this airline should be. Salary triples what you're making now. Full benefits, starting immediately, backdated to cover whatever gap comes before your official start date. Camilla stared at the card like it might dissolve if she looked away for even a second. I'm 26, she said. I've been flying 2 years. I don't have management experience. You have something better, Desmond said. You have the exact instinct this company lost a long time ago. I can teach management. I can't teach what you did tonight. Camilla's hands were shaking again, the way they had in the galley 3 hours earlier, when she'd first decided to carry that tray of steak dinners down the aisle. Okay, she said. Small. Certain. Okay. Yes. Good. Desmond allowed himself, for the first time all night, something close to a real smile. Take a few days. Call your mother. Tell your brother he's allowed to be proud of you out loud for once. Outside the terminal, the New York night had gone cold and clear, the specific sharp air of early autumn settling in over the taxi lines and the idling cars and the thousand small dramas of people arriving and departing without ever once knowing what had happened 5 hours earlier at 39,000 feet above them. Pri and Nanny stood near the curb, phone in hand, hours of footage and notes waiting to become a story that would, within 72 hours, be picked up by every major outlet in the country. She didn't publish that night. She thought about it, thought about the immediate, electric satisfaction of being first, of watching the numbers climb the way they always did whenever something true and ugly finally surfaced into daylight. Instead, she called Desmond's office the next morning and asked for an interview. He gave her one. Told her everything. The folder, the training pipeline, Rosalind Pierce, the internal investigation that would eventually reach back, through 3 decades of institutional practice, and surface 11 other flight attendants across 4 hubs who'd been taught some version of that same system. The story ran under Priya's byline 2 weeks later. Not a viral clip. A full investigation. The kind of journalism she'd built her entire career hoping to do, before algorithms convinced most people that 90 seconds was the outer limit of anyone's attention span. It won an award the following spring. She dedicated it, in an acceptance speech nobody expected her to give, to a 26-year-old flight attendant, who had carried a tray of evidence down an aisle, when it would have been so much easier not to. Walter Briggs called his son, from the parking garage, before he'd even started his car. Xavier picked up on the 4th ring, the specific reluctant 4th ring of a son who's learned, over years, that his father's calls usually come with an agenda already attached to them. Dad? Everything okay? No, Walter said. Not really. I need to say something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything back. Silence on the line. Cautious. Waiting. 6 months ago you called me, from that hotel in Charleston, Walter said. Told me what happened with security. And I asked you what you'd done wrong. I want you to know I've been thinking about that conversation for the last 3 hours straight, and I was wrong. Not you. Me. More silence. Longer this time. Dad, what happened? I watched something tonight, Walter said. On a flight. A man got treated exactly the way you got treated in that lobby. And I sat there for the first hour just eating a better steak than he was getting, not saying a single word, because it wasn't my problem. His voice caught. I don't want to be that person anymore, Xavier. I should have been that person for you 6 months ago, and I wasn't, and I'm sorry. That's it. That's the whole call. Xavier didn't say anything for a long moment. Thanks, Dad, he finally said. Quiet. Something loosening in his voice that had been tight for 6 months straight. That actually means a lot. Walter sat in his car in the JFK parking garage another 10 minutes, before he trusted himself enough to drive. 6 months passed. Continental Skyways relaunched under a new name, Meridian Air, with a new training program built entirely, from the ground up, co-designed by Camila Ortiz and in a decision that surprised almost everyone inside the company except Desmond himself, Eleanor Voss, whose unpaid consulting had turned, for months into something closer to genuine partnership than penance. Eleanor never fully forgave herself. She didn't need to. Desmond hadn't asked her to. He'd only asked her to do something useful, with the guilt instead of letting it curdle into either denial or despair, to turn years of expertise, once weaponized, into the same years of expertise finally aimed at the right target for once. Rosalind Pierce, the woman who'd handed Eleanor that folder decades earlier, was found living quietly in Florida, retired 11 years, and was informed by Halcyon's legal team that her name had surfaced in an internal investigation. She never spoke publicly about it. But the folder, and every document like it across 4 hubs, was destroyed within the month, replaced by training materials that measured service by exactly one standard: the ticket in a passenger's hand. Nothing else. Customer satisfaction scores rose 31% in the first quarter. More importantly to Desmond, complaints of differential treatment dropped to nearly zero. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Desmond drove east out of the city, with his 8-year-old son Theo, buckled into the back seat, asking the specific relentless questions of a child who has just learned his father used to be poor, and cannot fully square that fact against the house they currently live in. "So Grandpa fixed cars," Theo said for probably the 5th time that morning alone. "Engines. Planes, mostly, toward the end of his life. But he started with cars." "And you used to sweep the floor?" "Every Saturday." "Same as you're about to." Theo went quiet at that, clearly weighing the injustice of manual labor against the promise, extracted the night before under some duress, of pancakes afterward. The garage still stood. Desmond had bought the building 2 years earlier, quietly, through a shell company, before any of this, before Continental, before the acquisition, before a plastic cup of flat champagne had cracked something open in him that had been sealed shut since he was 24 years old on a Boston sidewalk. He hadn't known, back then, exactly why he wanted it. He'd just known he wasn't ready to let it become a parking lot, or a vape shop, or whatever the neighborhood eventually decided it needed to replace it instead. Now it was a training center. Not corporate, not glossy. A real working shop, half museum, half apprenticeship program for kids, from the neighborhood, who wanted to learn a trade the way Otis Calloway used to teach it, for free, to anyone willing to show up and sweep first, no exceptions made for anybody. Desmond parked out front. Sat for a moment, with his hands on the wheel, looking at the building his father had built, with his own 2 hands, and never once considered anything but ordinary. "Dad?" Theo's voice, small, from the back seat. "Was Grandpa proud of you?" Desmond thought about a captain on an airplane, 52 years old, who had taken his hat off in a first-class cabin out of a respect that had lived quietly in his body for decades, long after the words for it had faded away. Thought about a mechanic who used to brag, unprompted, every single week, about a boy at home who was going to do something with his life someday. "Every single day," Desmond said. "Whether I deserved it or not." He got out of the car. Walked around to open Theo's door. And together, father and son, they walked into a garage that still smelled faintly of motor oil. After all these years, the permanent smell of honest work, the kind that outlasts the people who did it, the kind Desmond intended to make absolutely sure never got mistaken for something less than what it actually was. Behind him, in a city full of runways and departures and 1,000 small daily judgments made in the space between a boarding pass and a smile, an airline kept flying. Different now. Not perfect. Nothing built by people ever is. But different, because one man had refused to raise his voice, and had let the truth do, patiently, what truth eventually always does. It outlasted the lie. And somewhere over the Atlantic, that same night, on a flight nobody would ever remember by name, a flight attendant 3 years into the job offered a window seat and a warm, unhesitating smile to a passenger in a hoodie and worn sneakers, without a single thought crossing her mind about who he might turn out to be. Because that, in the end, was the whole point of any of it.